Outer Wilds is the most unique game I've ever played. After finishing it, I kept replaying it again and again in my head, putting together the 300,000 year journey woven together throughout the game. The story isn't told chronologically, as the player, also known as the Hatchling, slowly uncovers the mystery of the past throughout the course of the game. It can be difficult to keep track of it all, and I found myself questioning parts of the story long after I'd completed the game. So, in these two videos, I'll be going through the story told in Outer Wilds in relatively chronological order, piecing together all the main parts of the story. Part 1 focuses on the events before we start playing as the Hatchling. It is the tale of the Nomai, a clan separated from their people, with a single ambitious goal: to find the Eye of the Universe. The Nomai were a sentient race with 3 eyes who were living in a clan-based culture in another system. An indeterminable time ago, one clan, headed by a Nomai named Escal, received a mysterious signal coming from the Hathian solar system. The clan determined that this signal was older than the universe itself, and they likened it to the shape of an eye. The Nomai would begin to call this signal the Eye of the Universe, or simply the Eye. Being a highly curious and intelligent species, the Nomai were intrigued by the signal from the Eye. Escal's clan immediately warped to the nearest source of the signal, the Hathian solar system, inside a ship known as the Vessel, which was powered by an advanced warp core. They were so excited to find the source of the Eye that they made the venture before alerting anyone to their actions. Unfortunately, Escal's clan did not receive a warm welcome to the solar system. The vessel warped within Dark Bramble, a planet that had been taken over by huge, invasive vines and terrifying, aggressive anglerfish. The vessel was quickly entangled within the bramble, with the Nomai scrambling to get to escape pods. They sent out a broadcast in their desperation, asking any Nomai clans with space travel capabilities to aid them immediately. No one came. 3 escape pods were launched. 1 made it to Ember Twin, 1 to Brittle Hollow, and the final one was ensnared by the bramble. The 3rd escape pod was damaged as it was ensnared, and the Nomai had no life support left. They decided to return to the vessel, using the vessel's beacon to guide them back. But space behaves unusually within Dark Bramble. The Nomai were receiving 2 signals from the vessel's beacon, in opposite directions. With time running short, the Nomai had no option but to take a 50-50 risk in investigating one of the signals, hoping it would lead them back to the vessel. Sadly, the Nomai travelled towards the wrong signal. Here, they met their end. Their mass grave can be found around the source of the duplicate signal. The occupants of the 2 surviving pods were now lost in a completely foreign solar system and separated from one another and the rest of their clan. Despite these challenges, the survivors remained determined and hopeful. They were incredibly resourceful people and were able to acclimate to and thrive within the solar system. Throughout their time here, the Nomai were fixated on a single mission: finding the location of the Eye. The Nomai quickly settled in their new home, building settlements on Brittle Hollow and the Ember Twin. Over time, the Nomai developed cities on these planets, which were called the Hanging City and the Sunless City. They soon got to work on finding the location of the Eye. The Nomai started simple, relatively speaking. They travelled to Atla Rock, a small moon orbiting Timber Hearth. Here, they built a device capable of locating celestial bodies within the solar system, calling it the Eye Signal Locator. While the locator identified the planets of the system, it failed to find the Eye. Instead, the locator swung around wildly, never settling on a location. After failing to find the Eye on Atla Rock, the Nomai attempted to find it using an observatory built on the southern pole of Brittle Hollow. Once more, while the device was capable of identifying all the planets in the system in relation to the Sun, it was unable to find the location of the Eye, instead depicting multiple potential orbits for the Eye. The Nomai now realised that they would require a different approach to find the Eye. Fortunately, a few of their scientists had an idea, but we'll get to that in a minute. First, it's important to understand what the Nomai had learnt about space and time. You see, the Nomai had been observing some strange phenomena within the solar system. Shortly after arriving in the solar system, the Nomai on Ember Twin lost their friend as he investigated a strange-looking rock. The rock, too, had vanished. The Nomai learned that the rock was capable of moving around when not being observed, and their friend had been travelling with the rock. Similarly, on Brittle Hollow, the Nomai observed a strange rock that would move when not observed. Trees near the strange rock also moved when not observed. So the Nomai on Brittle Hollow and Ember Twin learned two things. First was that some of the rocks in the solar system were quantum, meaning that they did not have a fixed location in space until they were observed by a conscious observer. The second was that objects near the quantum objects could become quantum themselves, merely through proximity to the quantum object. The next phenomenon the Nomai observed was the strange space-time effect while warping. So, the Nomai who lived on Brittle Hollow were at constant risk of falling into the core of the planet, which contained a black hole. This black hole would eject fallen Nomai on the outskirts of the solar system through a white hole. To combat this issue, the Nomai built a station right outside of the white hole, calling it, appropriately, White Hole Station. They also developed their own miniature black and white holes on Brittle Hollow's Black Hole Forge, which enabled them to make warp portals between White Hole Station and Brittle Hollow. In this way, fallen Nomai could quickly warp from White Hole Station back to Brittle Hollow. While their warp portals were a success, the Nomai noticed something intriguing. Travellers from Whitehall Station to Brittle Hollow appeared to be arriving at Brittle Hollow before they had technically left Whitehall Station. That means their time of arrival was a fraction of a second earlier than their time of departure. This greatly interested the Nomai, who realised that using enough energy, they could potentially send information back in time. These space-time anomalies allowed the Nomai to work on new ways to reach the Eye. This would require more experimentation, and we'll get to that in a moment. First, let's begin by looking at what the Nomai knew about quantum effects, and what this meant for their understanding of the Eye. Being greatly interested in the quantum shards, the Nomai continued to work on understanding quantum effects. Of particular interest to the Nomai was the quantum moon, which turned out to be the source of the quantum shards they had been observing throughout the solar system. The quantum moon piqued the Nomai's interest because it did not have a fixed orbit. Instead, it would appear within a random planet's orbit upon observation. This, of course, demonstrating the quantum properties. The Nomai would eventually undertake pilgrimages to the quantum moon. To get to the quantum moon, the Nomai pilgrim had to learn 3 things through their studies within the quantum tower on Brittle Hollow and the Tower of Quantum Trials on Giant's Deep. The first rule was the rule of quantum imaging, which is simply observing a quantum object or an image of a quantum object locks the object in to a single possibility. The second rule was the rule of quantum entanglement. This is where objects that are touching quantum objects become quantum themselves. The final rule was the rule of the sixth location. This is simply that the sixth location, which is the moon's orbit around the eye, can only be observed from the north pole of the quantum moon. So to combine these three rules, a pilgrim had to first photograph the quantum moon as they were approaching the moon's surface. This was to prevent the quantum moon from disappearing while it wasn't being observed. Once the Nomai landed on the quantum moon, they could enter a small building where they were able to completely shut off all light sources. In this way, the moon could hop from planet to planet before being re-observed by the Nomai pilgrim. Thus, the Nomai can keep observing and not observing the quantum moon until eventually the moon orbited the eye. The building on the quantum moon was also quantum, so the Nomai had to wait for the building to be on the north pole of the quantum moon before they could travel to the sixth location. Now, let's discuss the Nomai's beliefs about the eye and how these were shaped by their understanding of quantum effects. So we've already covered that the Nomai believed the eye was much older than the universe itself, and they were correct in this belief. But they also believed that the eye dwelled in a distant orbit around the Hathian solar system. Though they didn't actually uncover the exact location of the eye, they were correct in this assumption as well. The Nomai also correctly ascertained that the quantum moon was the eye's moon, and based on this, they hypothesized that the eye itself was quantum, and that the moon was perhaps quantum only because of its proximity to the eye. They were also correct about this, although they never got to confirm it for themselves. Based on the assumption that the eye was quantum, the Nomai were very interested in knowing what would happen if a conscious observer observed the eye. Now, back to the experiments the Nomai undertook to find the eye. We know that the first two experiments, that is, the eye signal locator and the southern observatory, failed to find the eye. So the Nomai developed a new, complicated plan. This plan hinged on what they had observed at the Brittle Hollow warp portals. That is, that using enough energy, they could send information back in time. Let's go through this experiment in detail. To begin, the Nomai thought that the eye was in a distant orbit to the Sun. Based on this, they decided to send probes out into space to find the eye. To do this, they built the orbital probe cannon, which was an extremely large cannon positioned in orbit around Giant's Deep, the planet that was furthest from the Sun. The orbital probe cannon was designed to fire a probe in a random direction and had a probe tracking module so that it could record the location of the probe in case the eye was found. The Nomai knew that if the eye truly did orbit the solar system, there were only a finite number of possibilities for where the eye could be located. However, that number of possibilities would be huge. So the orbital probe cannon could take lifetimes to find the eye, and the Nomai wanted to reach the eye within their lifetime. The Nomai figured that it might be possible to send information back in time, thus allowing them to repeat probe cannon firings again and again, until the location of the eye was found. But first, they needed to confirm that using warp portals it was possible to observe arriving through a portal receiver before actually entering the portal itself. To test this, they constructed the High Energy Lab on the Ember Twin. Here, they created warp portals using the black hole entry point and the white hole receiver to test the hypothesis. When objects were thrown in the direction of the black hole, they appeared in front of the white hole receiver before actually vanishing through the black hole. So for a small moment in time, there were two copies of the object. This confirmed to the Nomai that it was possible to send information back in time. However, the Nomai discovered that the amount of energy required to send information back in time increased exponentially by the amount of time that you wanted to send information back. The Nomai determined that 22 minutes would be a sufficient length of time for the orbital probe cannon to fire a probe, which could then find the eye. But in order to be able to send information back by 22 minutes, they would need to be able to harness an extreme amount of energy. And only one thing generated that much energy: a supernova. The Nomai knew that the sun was due to go supernova in roughly 300,000 years. However, they were keen to find the eye within their lifetime. The only way they saw they could do that was to force the sun to go supernova prematurely. They built the sun station for this very purpose, situating it in close orbit to the star. Next, we have the Ash Twin Project. The Ash Twin Project, or ATP, was at the heart of the search for the eye. The ATP is a facility that was to use the power of the supernova to send a signal 22 minutes back in time to tell the orbital probe cannon to fire a probe in a random direction. The ATP is powered by an advanced warp core, the same one that is used to power the vessel. Of course, in order to work, the ATP needed to be able to withstand the power of the supernova for a very short period of time, so that it could send a message back before it was ultimately destroyed. For this, the Nomai built the ATP within the core of the Ash Twin. However, building it within a core of a planet was not enough. The Nomai needed to completely encase the ATP in the most heat-resistant material they could find. To do this, they scoured the solar system for strong materials and submerged them in the lava found on Hollow's Lantern, Brittle Hollow's volcanic moon. The ore from Timber Half proved to be the most heat-resistant and was chosen to completely encase the ATP. Thus, there were no external entrances to the ATP, and warping was the only way the Nomai could gain entry. The way the Nomai warp into the Ash Twin Project is quite interesting. Usually, the warps worked by standing on a warp portal and waiting for the warp portal to be aligned with the desired planet's astral body. So, if a Nomai wanted to travel to the Sun Station, they needed to stand on the Sun Station warp portal located on Ash Twin, and then wait for that portal to be aligned with the Sun Station. Then they could instantly travel to the Sun Station. However, the warp portal for the Ash Twin project is located on the Ash Twin itself, so the Nomai couldn't simply stand on the warp portal and await for it to be aligned with the Ash Twin, because they were already on the Ash Twin. However, the Hourglass Twins, that is, the Ember Twin and the Ash Twin, share an astral body, which meant that the Nomai only needed to wait until the warp portal was aligned with the Ember Twin, and then they could warp from the Ash Twin warp portal to within the Ash Twin itself, where the ATP was located. Of course, the entire idea of sending information back in time to gain new information would be to actually learn from the previous information. Thus, there is no point in creating these loops if no one will remember that the loops have occurred, because then the Nomai would fail to act any differently across new loops because they hadn't learnt anything from the previous ones. To this issue, the Nomai devised a creative solution: the Nomai statues and masks. The Nomai statues were large busts placed around the solar system. For most of the loops, the Nomai statues were inactive, they didn't do anything. However, upon receiving a signal, the Nomai statues could awaken and bond with the nearest Nomai. This bonding would allow the Nomai's memories from that loop to be saved or backed up by Nomai masks, which were the counterparts to the statues located safely within the ATP. In this way, every time the supernova occurred, in 22 minutes' time, the memories from that current loop could be sent back in time to the beginning of the next loop. In this way, the Nomai could recall memories created in previous loops. The Nomai knew that finding the eye could take a substantial length of time, and they had no interest in repeating loop after loop while waiting for the eye to be found. So the Nomai made the statues inactive, and made sure that they would only awaken if something went wrong with the ATP, or if the eye was found. Thus, the Nomai would only be aware of the loops occurring if it was time to act on it. Ideally, because it was finally time to find the eye. So overall, the Nomai devised a solution that would allow them to gain information across loops, but only when they could use that information to further their goal. This method allowed them to gain information across a huge length of time with only 22 minutes of real time passing. So, the overall goal was to get the Sun Station to trigger the supernova, releasing the energy required to power the Ash Twin project, which could send information back in time by 22 minutes, telling the orbital probe cannon to fire a probe in a random direction. If the probe failed to find the eye, the loop would keep repeating and repeating and repeating until the eye is eventually found. The probe's information would be sent back to the Ash Twin project with each loop. Upon the eye being found, the Nomai statues were to awaken. The Nomai would now be aware of the loops happening and would realise that the eye had been found, and they could halt the Sun Station before it triggered the supernova. The Nomai would now have the coordinates of the eye. All they would have to do now is travel there. So, we know of the Nomai's ultimate goal and their plan to make it a reality. What went wrong? For all their intellect, passion, and collaboration, the Nomai failed in many of their endeavours, often due to no fault of their own. Let's begin with the orbital probe cannon. The cannon consisted of 3 modules, which were hoisted into the orbit of Giant Steep using the strange gravity-defying properties of the clockwise spinning tornadoes on Giant Steep. However, one of the pieces, the probe tracking module, was never installed on the cannon. Rather than being lifted into orbit, the tracking module was propelled downwards beneath the incredibly strong current that protects the planet's core. The Nomai were perplexed by this, but work within the Southern Observatory on Brittle Hollow demonstrated that there was a rare type of tornado on Giant Steep that rotated counterclockwise and pushed objects down rather than lifted them up. The Nomai never recovered the tracking module, and the orbital probe cannon was put on indefinite hiatus. Next, we have the eye. Despite the Nomai's singular goal of finding the eye, they never succeeded. Over time, the Nomai began to question whether the eye had truly been calling to them at all, whether it was truly conscious. In fact, as a child, the Nomai Solanum thought the eye was evil, having tricked them into coming to the Harthian solar system and subsequently dooming the clan within Dark Bramble. The closest the Nomai ever got to the eye was through the quantum moon, where they were able to observe the moon's reflection of the eye, never actually seeing it for themselves. Finally, we have the Sun Station. Unfortunately for the Nomai, the Sun Station did not succeed. Their attempts to spark a supernova barely made a difference to the Sun's surface. The Sun Station was the final failure of the Nomai people. And as they learned of their failure, a newcomer appeared in the solar system, the Interloper. They immediately left to investigate the Interloper, having detected an unusual energy signature from the comet. While exploring the Interloper's core for the source of this energy signature, 2 of the Nomai, Poke and Pi, discovered that the entire Interloper core was under immense pressure and was becoming more unstable as the comet approached the Sun. These Nomai recognized the impending doom that awaited their people, and their final words highlight their desperate attempts to alert their people of the risk. Poke left to alert the others, while Pi stayed behind to observe this strange new matter, known as ghost matter. Sadly, the Nomai were out of time. The Interloper's core ruptured, spewing ghost matter throughout the solar system, and in an instant wiping out the entire Nomai clan who called the solar system their home. But there was one who remained, Solanum. Solanum was completing her pilgrimage to the quantum moon when her clan was wiped out. Because of quantum fluctuation, she existed in all possibilities at the quantum moon when the explosion occurred. She was simultaneously present at all of the quantum moon's planets and at the eye of the universe, meaning she both died at each of the planets, and thus you can observe her corpse, and survived, and thus you can meet her at the eye. Although Solanum is a Nomai, we discuss her in more detail in part 2, as her interactions with the hatchling vastly shape the conclusion of the story. We don't know how long the Nomai remained in the Hathian solar system, and how long they were separated from the rest of their people. We also don't know the fate of the Nomai clans from outside of the solar system. What we do know, we can gather from messages broadcasted to the vessel. Long after Eskel's clan disappeared, the Nomai identified that the universe was ending, and broadcasted a message to all vessels, telling them to head to the gloaming galaxy where the suns were more stable. In these messages, the Nomai discuss the disappearance of Eskel's clan many years ago, a story which has long faded and was considered by some to be a myth. We do not know whether the Nomai were alive during the hatchling's journey, or whether Solanum was her species' endling. Ultimately, Eskel's clan took a great risk. They came to a solar system they had no knowledge of, simply because they received a signal from an ancient body. After losing many of their clan members, they kept searching for the Eye and were even willing to jeopardize the solar system on their quest. To recap, they weren't sure that the Eye was actually calling to them. They received the signal only once. Even if they did succeed in triggering the supernova, they could not be certain that the orbital probe cannon would find the Eye's location. Even if it did find the Eye, the Nomai had no idea what the purpose of the Eye was, nor why they were actually going there. And finally, what if their plan to cancel the supernova didn't work? They never even succeeded in starting the supernova. How could they be certain that they could stop one once they found the location of the Eye? Overall, the Nomai were a fascinating people, but the story doesn't end with them. After the interlopers' explosion and the eradication of the Nomai in the solar system, the Nomai's experiments remained neglected and dormant. The Ash Twin project and the orbital probe cannon were inactive, having never received the signal to begin the loops. The statues remained asleep because the Eye had not been found. Much of what was happening in the solar system during this time is a mystery to us, but there are two things that we know. The first is that the quadrupedal aquatic organisms on Timberhalf evolved, becoming the bipedal Hathians. The second is that time marched on. Fast forward approximately 280,000 years after the extinction event. Though the Nomai sun station failed, the sun has now reached the end of its life cycle. The sun starts to use up heavy metals and gains mass, turning into a red giant, before eventually collapsing under its own weight and going supernova. This sets everything in motion. The supernova brings the Ash Twin project to life, starting the loop. The Ash Twin project sends a message to the orbital probe cannon to release a probe in a random direction in search of the Eye. The orbital probe cannon breaks in this process. Because the loop has been initiated, the orbital probe cannon can technically release the probe millions of times across millions of loops, each time in a random direction, despite the cannon breaking. This is of course because the loop allows for different realizations for the same moment in time. By the start of the game, the orbital probe cannon has released more than 9 million probes, meaning this 22-minute loop has been gathering data for the amount of time equivalent to 390 Earth calendar years. The Nomai's plans have finally come to fruition many years too late, but, as we will see, there was another who could fulfill the Nomai's destiny. In part 2, we talk about the Hatchling's journey. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. This is my first YouTube series and I'm currently editing part 2, which should be available pretty soon. If you want to be notified about that, please subscribe, and I would love it if you could like this video or leave a comment in the section below if you have any feedback. I also have a Twitch channel where I stream at least 3 times a week. You can find me at miss_cherries, or you can just follow my link tree, which I'll attach below. Once again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a phenomenal day, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Goodbye.